So to start class off today, we talked about what is a nation, right? So we have it with section on anti-Semitism. We have three examples, and the first two are clearly explicitly essays in which these people are thinking about what nationhood is. This is really what's underneath their ideas. So Bauer starts off with thinking about um, the problem of Judaism as well as the problem of religion. And he doesn't really understand or care to understand, whichever it is, the difference in the sort of structural advantages that Christianity has in Germany. Um, but he is thinking about what it means to be a German citizen. And we see the same with Dwaring. It's about half a century later. And Dwaring is shifting to a racial conception. Okay, so as we're looking at Bauer and Dwaring, we're seeing that Bauer is worried about the question of Judaism, of practicing religion, and with Dwaring it shifts over to something more like about Jewishness as race, as ethnicity, and really as blood, as biology, right? That he has this a very different construct. So when we're thinking about anti-Semitism, we can sort of think to ourselves, we have a few kinds of questions. We want to know what is the problem, right? So we hear people talking about the Jewish problem. The Jewish problem is the question of Jewish citizenship. It means, or the Jewish question is, should Jews be citizens? That the 19th century saw an enormous amount of change. Serfs were freed all over, right? So there's all kinds of new um, democratic government beginning. There's a question about whether monarchies should continue to exist and whether there can be a sort of coexistence of democracy and monarchy in some way. Um, and so then we're seeing that in response to that, these Germans in particular, but even though we have these examples of Germans, I want to be really clear that this isn't only happening in Germany. In many ways, France is kind of the birthplace of modern anti-Semitism, but we have these examples that I think really help us pin down different types of arguments that people would make about Jews. Okay, so I want to look at a PowerPoint to think about a couple things. So as we're examining all of this, what we have to really have in our mind as scholars is the question of what is a nation? All right, so what makes anyone belong to a nation? Is belonging to a nation voluntary or involuntary? And then an idea of, are nations new or are they old? And often they're articulated as if they're very, very old, as if they've existed almost like since the beginning of time. But as scholars, we know that they're new. They're being formed in this time period. The very question of whether a nation exists and who belongs to it is the question of the 19th century. Okay. So some of the questions or some of the answers that people had, that when we talked about just what does it mean to be an American, as a way to sort of start thinking about this question of nationhood and how complicated it is, people listed hard work, or the idea of a work ethic, um, just a general idea that one should be proud of the country, whichever country it is, but also in this case in particular in the US, that there's a sense of shared values. Someone said that it's really about territory, that whether a person is living somewhere or working there, And that one we certainly saw get really complicated. I want to add that there's also an idea about not just territory, like geographic lines on a map, but also the land itself, as if there is a connection between blood and land that maybe is a bit more European than the United States, because there are very different narratives about how did we, the citizens, get here. And in Germany or France, there's some kind of sense that there's French blood and that like it's linked almost mystically to the land, or German blood and it's linked to the land, or Polish blood and it's linked to the land, and that others are somehow interlopers on that territory. People listed the Constitution, the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, um, somewhat similar to values but distinct, an idea of goals, an idea that people are born here, which is really, in many ways, is uniquely American. That it's not only American, but this is one of the sort of few things that we thought about that was really more specifically American, that one has automatic citizenship if one's born here. An idea of following the law, that there is a process toward citizenship, at least theoretically, that people are self-identifying. And then kind of thinking back about territory or a lot of these things, a sense that it's portable, that if I leave the United States and I go to wherever, I might go to Germany, I go to Argentina, wherever I go, I still am American. And in fact, I might feel more American there, I mean, my own self, than I do here, right? Because there's a kind of contact and I experience the difference. And then lastly, we talked about the idea of whether, of the US as being multi-ethnic. But of course, whether the US should be multi-ethnic is, I think we can see, a really big debate. So I think that gave us a lot of ideas of, these are similar kinds of questions that people are wondering about for their nation, and asking, how should people get citizenship, right? So Jews don't have citizenship before the 19th century. At the very, very end of the 18th century, France gave Jews citizenship and then they took it back and then they were like, okay, you can be citizens. In Germany, there was very nearly citizenship in 1848, but it didn't pass. However, a lot of people really thought it would, and we have to remember, I think, that world history is contingent, that something different would have happened if Jews had gotten citizenship in Germany that early. If we're speaking about Eastern Europe, Jews never get citizenship in the Russian Empire. And so in the early 19th century, in many ways, Jews have more privileges than other subjects, we might say, of the Russian Empire, that are related to rights that they had as a result of a deal with the earlier Kingdom of Poland that had controlled the territory where Jews lived. But then the serfs in Russia are emancipated in 1861. And so from then on, Jews are have fewer rights than most citizens. And then following 1881, it really is sort of actually explicitly stated that Jews are a different kind of group of people, and there are nationally coordinated outbreaks of violence called pogroms. So Jews in the Russian Empire are not emancipated until 1917. They're never emancipated in the Russian Empire. They're emancipated in the Soviet Union. Okay, so thinking about all these questions, the issue for all of these places is, why should Jews have citizenship? Some idea that perhaps they're not worthy of it, that even for places that are not ethnic democracies, right? There's ethnic democracies where people of a certain what we might call ethnicity, right? But here a sort of one-to-one idea of ethnicity and nation have citizenship, that Jews are seen as somehow outside of that, even if they've lived in the territory for, or their families have, for hundreds of years. And so we see really this question of what is a nation in Europe. The way that that question is worked out is largely by thinking about Jews and what will their place be in the particular country, whichever example we're thinking of. But for us, namely Germany.